Hello and welcome to Brand X Reviews. This is a new 4-part series where we're going to be talking about the Star Trek movies. So in part 1 we're talking about the original series cast, that's Captain Kirk, Spock, all that stuff. Those were the first 6 movies. In the second video what we've done is talked about the next 4 films from that point on, so films 7 through 10. That was with the Next Generation cast, so that's Captain Picard, played by Patrick Stewart. And those were those movies anyway. Now, following that, in part 3, we talk about the J.J. Abrams movies, specifically that trilogy of movies. So that's films 11 through 13, and then part 4, we talk about the future of the franchise. So that's what it's about. Enjoy.
Very quick 10-second promo and affiliated link for you with a discount code Tactical Soap. We've got Maverick, Bond, and Durden. Check out the video description for a link and a discount code.
Recording again. So obviously yesterday we were talking about Star Trek movies 1 to 6 with the original cast. This one they weren't in the video that's what we're talking about. This one we're talking about Star Trek's 7 through 10. They're not numbered technically, but in the franchise that's the numbers that they came out. The Next Generation movies. So anything to say generally overall before we start, Carl?
Nothing specific. Like I said, these were very much like the Next Generation films, because they'd kind of brought the kind of the series of like the original series films to their conclusion. Like The Undiscovered Country was kind of like the send off.
Mm.
You know, at the end they're like, second star to the right and straight until morning, and it was kind of like a good send off for everything they'd done.
Yeah. So for context, in terms of when these came out, so the original movies came out from 1979 to 1991. Those were the original cast. Now, in 87 on TV, that's when Star Trek The Next Generation started. So there was a bit of a window when The Next Generation was on TV. The original cast movies, the first 6 movies, the last of those 2, so 5 and 6, were in the cinemas. The Next Generation was doing really well on TV from 87 up till 94 from memory. And in 94, that's when this first Star Trek movie came out as the Next Generation series was finishing. Or did it finish in 93, 94, the series? I can't remember.
Oh, I can't remember off the top of my head. I think they had finished by the time he started doing the movies.
Yeah, so maybe like a year or so. To further complicate things, there was like DS9 and that, but we'll get into that. So
yeah, like I say, there was no DS9 movies, there was no Voyager movies. They kind of like run out of steam before they would have got started.
Yeah. So the Next Generation wave of movies ran from 1994 up till 2002, and there's 4 of them. So we're going to talk about them in chronological order. So the first of their movies, we'll call it Star Trek 7. It was called Star Trek Generations. Very clever title because you've got Picard and Kirk on screen together. Because obviously they didn't live in the same time frame, but because of the story, which we'll get into, the 2 of them got to meet, and this was like a Star Trek fan's like dream. It was like Batman versus Superman. It was one of those kind of moments. And even though the film is a bit lame, stuff like that still does make that film very entertaining. Those bits in the movie are very good. So I'll let you have
in some ways, I think it's a bit like, for me, rose-tinted glasses. Like, I remember watching it when I was a kid and liking it. But kind of like, if I'm going to be like objective about it, like some of the choices in it were a bit like, come on, really? That's how we're going to end this? Okay.
Yeah. So basically, it's the last that we ever get to see of William Shatner as Kirk. This is his last appearance, and it's a bit crap how they kind of dispense of his character without going into too much information. But it was cool to see him on screen, and the bits together where they're kind of having a bit of like kind of backwards and forwards between the 2 characters, like when he says, I was running around the galaxy while your great-grandfather was in diapers, which I seem to remember Scotty said that because they found Scotty, didn't they, in TNG, and he said the exact same line.
I was actually going to touch on that, but yeah, just finish talking about this film and then we can touch on that.
Yeah. So, but the premise of it is, anyway, in a nutshell, so at some point during Kirk's retirement or whatever, whether he's just retired or he's about to retire, he's basically christening this new enterprise sometime after he's retired. And he gets pulled into this thing called the Nexus. And time doesn't really affect this place. So you can come back to the Nexus in like a million years and people will still be in there like alive as if they've just got there or whatever. So kind of like a wormhole. So he gets taken into that, and that's basically the last anyone sees of him, like ever, apart from Picard, who is it 150 years later when the Next Generation was set? I can't remember.
It's something like that. It is actually possible to survive from one to the other, because in the very first episode of the Next Generation Encounter at Farpoint, you do get a brief cameo by like a really, really old Bones.
McCoy.
Yeah, he's like supposed to be well over 100 at this point. He's like in a big cybernetic kind of like walking frame that he's in and stuff. He's like that old.
Yeah.
And he's supposed to be like the last of that generation that's still alive. So almost like the pilot's a bit of like a passing of the torch almost.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff that happens in that movie. But anyway, Picard gets Kirk out of the Nexus and into his timeline, and they fight a bad guy played by Malcolm McDowell.
Yeah, I really like Malcolm McDowell. He's been in some shit, but it's usually not his fault that it's shit.
Yeah. So the film's okay, but I mean that it's like Batman v Superman. Okay, doesn't cut it for a moment like this. So the seeing him on screen together is cool, but the film itself is a bit.
I've just got that kind of like hazy fond memory of like I can remember going to the cinema and seeing it and stuff. And like I say, I think that does elevate it a little bit for me, which is I think I'm a bit more forgiving of it than a lot of people are who are just like, what the fuck.
I think we're in agreement. I mean, it was an okay film. The next film, so that was 94. The next film was in 97, First Contact. Pretty much the high point of this movie franchise in terms of these 4 movies for the Next Generation. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, it pretty much is by far the best out of all of them. It is kind of, it's often kind of described as kind of like the Next Generation's Wrath of Khan. It doesn't really get quite that good, but I mean, First Contact is like pretty much like the best.
Yeah. And it's similar to Star Trek 4 in that it seems like the most accessible movie for a broader audience. You don't necessarily have to understand the series or the characters to go walk into this movie blind and still enjoy it. You could still get it.
I mean, technically, you can even argue if you do fully understand like the series, it's a bit like, okay, I kind of get why he's pissed off with the Borg, but at the same time, we've seen him interact with the Borg, and he's nowhere near this, like, you know, kind of like kill them all, like sons of bitches, kind of, you know.
Yeah, where did that come from? Because that was
like
the point.
He is kind of against them, but not to this degree.
Well, demonstrably so, because there's that episode I, Borg, where they have the opportunity to basically put a virus into the Borg hive, and Picard, despite everything that he's been through, says, you know, who are we to exterminate a race? Because if we do that, we're no better than them, that kind of argument.
Yeah.
And then the next time you see him in this position, he's like, it's the Moby Dick thing, but he's now Khan, it's his wrath, you know?
I mean, it kind of works in some ways, because you can kind of argue, you know, like when he's here, like right in front of them, actually fighting them, it's just bringing all that stuff back for him. But yeah, it's a bit like, well, it was way more sanguine about this last time he ran into the Borg.
Yeah, and I suppose what you could say is, doesn't his brother die in Generations, a previous movie? So you could say that messed him up a little bit. So now he's lost his humanity. You could make a point. I don't think they'd go down that route directly.
Even could take that a step further, because ultimately, after he gets turned into Locutus, the very next episode, he goes back to Earth and back to the vineyard and back to his brother.
Yeah.
And the two have like a really fucked up relationship and don't get on too well. But it's also kind of developed as like, but that's what Picard needed, because ultimately, like, they get into like a bit of a tussle and stuff, and he's like, you know, what did they do to you?
Yeah, I remember that. It's funny, I haven't seen these for years, but I remember that was like the season opener, wasn't it, for the next
Yeah.
season? I remember, yeah.
It's one of those, like, even sci-fi degrees, like, I can't really give this like a score because it's just so unlike anything else in Next Generation. Like, you can't really compare it to the other ones. It's like a completely different kind of thing.
Yeah. But it's pretty cool because in this one, the premise of it is the Borg, similar to Terminator, they can't beat them in the current day, so the Borg sends something back in time to change the present. And basically, what they do is it kind of borrows from a bit of a story about a character in the original series called Zephram Cochrane, who was the guy who made first contact with the aliens. Well, just with the aliens by creating was it Warp One, the
He
spacecraft?
basically creates the first warp drive.
Yeah, and in doing so, aliens then realize that humans have then developed to the point where they can now be contacted, and obviously that's where the whole Star Trek thing comes from, the concept of humans going out into space with other aliens. But if the Borg can go back to that point in time, stop that from happening, isolate the human race from everything else, they can then take them over retroactively. But they do that, and the Enterprise. Well, it's the Enterprise, isn't it? Is it Enterprise F at this point? I forget which one it is.
It's E. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. They figure out that they can go back through this temporary door, well, that the Borg have gone through, and go back in time with them and stop the Borg from stopping first contact. So it's similar to Star Trek 4 in that point. So it's kind of like the best of Star Trek 2 and 4. To the point where even the trailer for First Contact uses the music from The Wrath of Khan. That was kind of their way of saying this is our version of that. It's a good film.
Yeah, like I say, I'd recommend that before like Generations. Like, I like Generations personally, but I can see a lot of the criticisms with it.
Yeah. And it brought the Borg Queen into it as well, played by, was it Alice Krieg? I think her name was. She was pretty good.
Like a mixed thing, because although she did a pretty good job in the film, it's like, did they really need like a personification though? Like, weren't they a bit more menacing when they didn't have that?
Yeah, that was, again, with the movie, they just kind of had to, I think they pushed it a bit too far, and it kind of betrayed some of the good stuff that the series set up. But at the end of the day, you got a good movie out of it. So that was those two. Now, the next two movies, don't have much to say about because they're not very good. I don't remember them as
What's the next? The next one was Insurrection, wasn't it?
Insurrection, yeah. As we always say, we've seen better two-parters of the Next Generation than this movie.
Like I say, it is worth noting that, when faced with like choices that he does not agree with from Starfleet Command, Picard just fucks off to his vineyard. I mean, he stands up and does something about it.
Yeah. So is that a bit of a jab at the Picard series?
Yes.
Yeah, I've not watched that, but I've heard nothing but bad things about it.
Yeah, like I say, Insurrection, not the worst of the Star Trek films, but it is very much like, this could have just been a two-parter. And honestly, it probably would have been better if it had been a two-parter, because I think the guys who were doing the series would have had a better grasp on some of the characters and so forth.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't have much to say about it, so we'll kind of skip that. I would suggest, if you're going to watch these movies, if you're going to skip any of them, skip Star Trek Insurrection and the next film, which was it Nemesis?
Yeah, Nemesis had its moments, and I do like some parts of it, but yeah, it was definitely on the downwards decline at this. You can kind of see why this sort of contributed to killing Star Trek for a while, anyway, because the films were kind of like lagging and being a bit meh. And then on the series, you had like Voyager, which was very kind of raw. It had its moments, and then you had Enterprise, which had a lot of problems. And it's like, yeah, you can see why people were just like, I'm not really interested in Star Trek anymore at this point.
Yeah, so you had Insurrection in '98, and then you had Nemesis in 2002 with a very young Tom Hardy playing a young Picard. Well, a young sort of clone of Picard or something. Is that right? What was it?
Yeah, he's supposed to be like a teenage version of Picard. Who's like, well, why has he got no fucking hair then? We've seen teenage Picard. he has hair. You know, he lost hair later in life. Like
Yeah, Picard
that
with a
happens
bald
with
thing,
people that they start out with a full head of hair and then lose hair. I can remember a point
Yeah.
when you had like a full head of hair. I wouldn't clone a teenage version of you and have them bald.
Yeah, very unusual, and it's not even Tom Hardy because he's a good actor, but he's in his early days. He had a lot of work to do. What's funny is kind of going off a little bit, but obviously with the next video we're going to be talking about the J.J. Abrams movies, and Chris Pine plays young Kirk. Well, Tom Hardy played a young Picard, and there's that movie This Means War where you've got Chris Pine and Tom Hardy kind of like facing off against each other. It's basically a young Kirk and Picard in that movie. Side trivia there for you. Yeah, I'm kind of talking about other films now because at this point I really don't want to be talking about Star Trek movies because these last two of the Next Generation ones are a bit crap. So, but yeah, well, anything else before we wrap this one up and go on? We'll obviously be coming back tomorrow, but what? Anything else?
Yeah, like I say, this was kind of the end for like Star Trek. Not the end as in like, oh, it never came back. It was the end for quite some time where it just went away. There was no new series after like Series 4 of Enterprise. And it was kind of done at that point until we got into the like Abrams like reboot.
Yeah,
But,
which
yeah,
we'll
we
talk
can leave
about.
that for when we actually talk about.
Yeah, well, we'll cut this short then. So tomorrow, if you come back, we'll be talking about the films 11, 12, and 13. So those are not a reboot and not remakes. They are sequels, not even prequels. They are sequels in a lot of ways, depending on how you look at it. So, but we'll talk about it. We'll explain that next video anyway, because it does get a bit complicated. I know Stuart, who we're primarily making these videos for, those are the ones that he knows best because he's just watched them recently. So yeah, tomorrow come back. If you want, you can like this video, subscribe to the channel. You can check out the affiliates Tactical Soap in our video description with a link and a discount code. But for now, we will say thank you very much for watching.
So that was part 2 of this series. Check back tomorrow for part 3 where we will be talking about the J.J. Abrams Kelvin Universe movies.